Welcome to this professional certification preparation course. In this first chapter, we will establish the foundational mindset and structural knowledge required to pass your Scrum Master examination on the first attempt. This course is an unofficial, independently produced educational resource. It is not affiliated with, endorsed by, or connected to Scrum.org or the Scrum Alliance in any way. This content is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered an official study guide provided by the certifying bodies. This course is meticulously designed to cut through the noise and focus exclusively on the mechanics and philosophy of the official Scrum Guide. By moving beyond simple memorization, you will develop the depth of understanding necessary to navigate the complexities of real-world Scrum implementations. You will learn to parse complex scenario-based exam questions with ease while gaining the practical clarity needed to serve your future teams effectively. If you are serious about achieving your certification and mastering this framework, you have arrived at the right place. Scrum is intentionally defined as a lightweight framework that enables people, teams, and organizations to generate value through adaptive solutions for complex problems. It relies heavily on empiricism, which asserts that knowledge comes from experience and making decisions based on what is known. For empiricism to function, the framework rests upon three pillars: transparency, inspection, and adaptation. Transparency ensures that the aspects of the process are visible to those responsible for the outcome, while inspection permits the team to detect undesirable variances. Finally, adaptation allows the team to adjust the process or the material immediately if inspection reveals something is outside of acceptable limits. Beyond the technical pillars, the success of Scrum depends on the living embodiment of 5 core values: commitment, focus, openness, respect, and courage. These values are not merely abstract ideals, but are operational requirements that guide the behavior of the Scrum team members in their interactions and tasks. When team members demonstrate commitment to their goals and focus on the current sprint objective, they naturally align with the framework's intent. Openness regarding work and challenges, respect for each other's capability, and the courage to tackle tough problems form the bedrock of a high-performing team. These values provide the ethical and psychological framework that supports the mechanical implementation of roles, events, and artifacts. As we progress through the curriculum, we will examine the structure of the professional certification exams, which typically require a thorough understanding of the Scrum Guide and an ability to apply in context. Passing these exams is rarely about rote learning, but rather about internalizing the transition from traditional project management to the role of servant leader. You must shift your perspective from command and control tactics toward facilitating self-managing, cross-functional teams that hold themselves accountable for the product. We will follow a strategic roadmap that breaks down the 3 accountabilities, 5 events, and 3 artifacts into actionable knowledge blocks. This trajectory is engineered to eliminate uncertainty and build your confidence for the day you sit for your exam. Good luck as you embark on this learning journey. Welcome to this examination of the Scrum Master Accountability, where we will dissect the specific responsibilities defined by the current Scrum Guide. We are setting the stage for everything you need to master to pass your exam and function effectively in this role. The Scrum Master is accountable for establishing Scrum as defined in the Scrum Guide, which means they are responsible for the Scrum team's effectiveness. You might view this role as a teacher, a mentor, and ultimately a servant leader, but the core mandate remains the successful implementation of the framework. A Scrum Master does not manage the team in the traditional hierarchical sense, but instead manages the process and the environment in which the team operates. By ensuring the team understands theory and practice, the Scrum Master enables the team to leverage empirical process control. Think of this as creating the guardrails within which self-management can actually thrive rather than descend into chaos. If the team cannot effectively inspect and adapt, the Scrum Master has failed to establish the foundation of Scrum. Consequently, every activity you undertake must map back to either increasing the team's ability to produce value or refining the process by which that value is delivered. Serving the Scrum team involves a delicate balance of coaching and active facilitation, particularly when it comes to self-management and cross-functionality. Many new practitioners confuse guidance with command and control, yet the true leader focuses on helping members grow their autonomy. You should actively coach the team in how to manage their own work rather than assigning tasks or acting as a taskmaster yourself. Cross-functionality is just as vital because a team that depends on external silos will inherently struggle with flow and predictability. Your role is to identify those dependencies and help the developers eliminate them, often by encouraging the team to learn new skills or adjust their ways of working. When a team struggles with internal conflict or decision-making, you provide the tools for them to resolve it themselves, ensuring that they become stronger for having navigated the challenge. This is how you foster a truly high-performing unit that owns its results. Beyond the internal dynamics of the team, the Scrum Master must also influence the broader organization, acting as a leader and a coach for the larger system. This is frequently where many people stumble because organizational change is notoriously difficult to navigate without clear direction. You are tasked with leading and training the organization in its Scrum adoption, which implies that your impact extends far beyond your immediate colleagues. You will often find yourself acting as a diplomat, helping managers and stakeholders understand that Scrum requires transparency and a commitment to empirical evidence. By planning and advising on Scrum implementations, you create a structure that supports the teams rather than suffocating them under bureaucratic red tape. This requires deep knowledge of change management and the ability to articulate how Scrum metrics relate to organizational outcomes. Success here is measured by how well your company understands the necessity of iterative delivery and the value of short feedback loops. Managing impediments is perhaps the most visible aspect of your daily work, yet requires a nuanced eye to understand what constitutes a real barrier. It is not merely about clearing a path. It is about addressing the root causes that create obstacles to progress. When you focus on helping the team create high-value increments that meet the definition of done, you are naturally exposing the systemic issues that prevent excellence. A stakeholder might demand a feature that violates the intent of the current sprint, and your job is to intercede to protect that focus. Similarly, you must dismantle the cognitive and structural barriers between stakeholders and the Scrum team, as these gaps almost always lead to misunderstandings and wasted effort. Your objective is always to maximize efficiency by simplifying communication and ensuring that the work being done aligns perfectly with the strategic goals of the organization. If you're not actively navigating these complex organizational politics, you're likely missing a key part of your accountabilities. Helping everyone understand an empirical approach is fundamental to success because complex work cannot be planned up front. In a complex domain, you have to embrace the unknown, which often makes traditional management styles very uncomfortable. Your job is to create psychological safety so that stakeholders can see the value of transparency, inspection, and adaptation in real time. By showing them physical evidence, the increment, rather than just reports or spreadsheets, you earn their trust and build a more productive partnership. When stakeholders see progress as a tangible, usable product, they're much more willing to support the empirical nature of the Scrum framework. This shift in mindset is what allows the organization to pivot when the market changes or when information surfaces. Ultimately, you are ensuring that the team creates value not by working harder, but by working more effectively toward shared destination. Until then, welcome to this chapter, where we will examine the product owner's core responsibilities and how they drive product value within a Scrum environment. We will cover the mechanics of backlog management, stakeholder representation, and the strategic alignment required for successful outcomes. The product owner occupies a unique space in Scrum, acting as the bridge between stakeholders and the Scrum team to maximize the value of the product. It is a common misconception that the product owner is merely a requirements gatherer or a scribe who writes tickets based on user demands. In reality, this role is explicitly an accountability for value optimization, which necessitates a deep understanding of the market, the business, and the product vision. If the product does not deliver tangible value to its users, the effort exerted by the developers is essentially wasted. A successful product owner constantly evaluates the return on investment and ensures that the team's energy is directed toward the most impactful initiatives. This accountability cannot be shared by a committee because conflicting priorities would inevitably paralyze the decision-making process. By formalizing this as a singular position, Scrum ensures that there is a clear, accountable individual who can provide definitive answers when trade-offs must be made. Central to this role is the management of the product backlog, which serves as the single source of truth for upcoming work on the product. The product owner is responsible for developing and explicitly communicating a product goal, which provides the necessary context for everything the team builds during a sprint. Without a clear product goal, the backlog easily devolves into a disorganized list of unrelated features that lack a cohesive vision. Creating and clearly communicating backlog items is the daily manifestation of this responsibility, but the items themselves are only as useful as their descriptions are transparent. The product owner must ensure that these items are decomposed sufficiently so that the developers can understand the intent behind every request. Transparency is not just about visibility. It is about shared understanding where everyone agrees on what the intended outcome looks like for the end user. Ordering the product backlog is perhaps the most critical tactical activity for ensuring the transparency and visibility of upcoming value. This ordering process is dynamic, as market conditions, feedback from stakeholders, and team insights constantly shift the priority of different items. The product owner must be bold enough to say no to requests that do not align with the product strategy or the current sprint goals. While the product owner represents the needs of the stakeholders, they must also balance these needs against the realities of team capacity. Pushing a team to work beyond a sustainable pace effectively destroys long-term value, as technical debt and burnout accumulate rapidly. A healthy relationship with the developers depends on the product owner's ability to communicate the why rather than just dictating the what. When the team understands the business vision, they are better equipped to suggest technical alternatives that might deliver more value with less effort. Collaboration with the Scrum Master is an often underestimated aspect of the product owner's success, particularly regarding the refinement process. While the product owner owns the backlog, the Scrum Master helps create the environment where that backlog is refined effectively and consistently. They work together to ensure that the team can inspect and adapt the backlog without losing focus on the broader objective. This synergy ensures that the team works on the most impactful tasks while maintaining a sustainable flow of valuable increments. The product owner is not an island. They are an integral part of the Scrum team, relying on the developers to provide estimates and identify technical dependencies. By maintaining this delicate balance between business vision and technical constraints, the product owner ensures that the Scrum team remains effective and focused. Complexity in products requires constant inspection, and the product owner must be ready to pivot their strategy based on the empirical evidence gathered from each increment. See you in our next session. Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to unpack what it actually means to be a developer within the Scrum framework and how that definition drives the success of the entire team. When we talk about the developers in Scrum, we are referring to the specific accountability within the Scrum team that is entirely dedicated to creating any aspect of a usable increment during each sprint. It is perhaps a common misconception to think of developers strictly as software engineers, but in the context of professional Scrum, the term encompasses anyone who possesses the necessary skills to contribute to the creation of value. These individuals are collectively responsible for crafting the Sprint Backlog, which serves as their actionable plan for the duration of the sprint. Because they're the ones closest to the work, they're best positioned to adapt this plan daily to ensure they remain aligned with the sprint goal. This requires a shift from a command and control mindset to one where the professionals involved take full ownership of their output. They are not merely completing tasks assigned by an external manager. They are actively shaping the work to ensure it meets the highest standards of quality through a shared understanding of the definition of done. A fundamental aspect of this accountability is the concept of self-management, which effectively removes the need for external oversight regarding the mechanics of daily work. Within the Scrum team, the developers hold the autonomy to decide who performs specific tasks, how those tasks are executed, and when they are addressed during the sprint. This level of agency is not granted arbitrarily. It is earned through the development of shared accountability and professional trust among team members. When a group of professionals decides how to solve a complex problem without waiting for instructions, they eliminate the inherent latency of hierarchical decision-making. This environment encourages individuals to step up and address bottlenecks as they arise rather than waiting for an intervention. By fostering this internal culture of responsibility, the team stabilizes its velocity and improves its ability to forecast future performance, which is an essential characteristic of a mature, self-managing Scrum team. Furthermore, the developers must be cross-functional, meaning they collectively possess all the skills required to convert product backlog items into a valuable, releasable increment. This does not imply that every single developer must be a generalist proficient in every imaginable discipline, but rather that the team as a single unit must have no dependencies on parties outside of the Scrum team to deliver work. If a team frequently waits for an architectural review from a different department or a quality assurance sign-off from a separate silo, they're by definition failing to act as a cross-functional unit. This structural design is intentional because it prevents the dilution of responsibility that often occurs when work is passed between different groups. When the team possesses end-to-end responsibility, there is no place to shift blame if an increment fails to meet the quality standards. You will find that this creates a highly focused professional environment where the emphasis is entirely shifted toward delivering measurable value to the customer. You might wonder why Scrum insists that there be no sub-teams or internal hierarchies within the group of developers. The primary reason for this is to preserve collective ownership, which is crucial for tackling work in complex problem-solving environments. If you introduce titles or silos within the team, you inevitably fracture the shared goals and create artificial barriers that hinder communication and collaboration. A team that consists of smaller groups operating independently often struggles to integrate their work, leading to the infamous integration hell at the end of a long development cycle. By keeping the developers as one unified body, Scrum forces the group to confront their challenges together and resolve internal conflicts without resorting to bureaucratic escalations. This structure keeps the feedback loop as tight as possible and ensures that everyone is equally invested in the outcome of the sprint, rather than being biased toward the specific segment of work that their particular subteam handles. Professionalism among the developers also means holding each other accountable for the standards they have collectively established. When team members see that an increment is sliding toward a state that does not reflect their definition of done, it is their responsibility to stop the progress and address the issue together. This can be an uncomfortable experience at first for many teams that are used to a culture where only a manager or a team lead provides negative feedback. However, in Scrum, this peer-to-peer accountability is the engine that maintains the velocity and the health of the team over the long term. If you are preparing for your certification, remember that the Scrum Master is not responsible for enforcing day-to-day work tasks. That burden sits squarely on the shoulders of the developers. They are the practitioners who turn the vision identified by the product owner into reality through sustained, disciplined effort and open communication. Essentially, the power of a developer lies in their ability to remain focused on the sprint commitment while maintaining flexibility in the path taken to reach that goal. This balance is what separates high-performing teams from those that struggle to execute after planning. As you continue your study, look for ways that these accountabilities translate into real-world efficiency and how the lack of them usually points to underlying dysfunctions in team structure. You now have a firm grasp of the mechanics behind the developer's role, which will prove invaluable during your assessment. I will see you in the next lesson. Welcome back to our exploration of the Scrum framework. In this session, we investigate the mechanics of effective team dynamics within the Scrum environment. The Scrum team is envisioned as a cohesive unit of professionals, exclusively focused on a single, shared objective known as the product goal. This structure mandates an intentional approach to composition, where the size must be carefully balanced to sustain agility while ensuring sufficient capacity to deliver meaningful work. You should aim for a team size of 10 or fewer people, as this range optimizes communication overhead and fosters the intimacy required for high-velocity collaboration. When teams become too large, the complexity of information exchange often leads to inefficiencies and a breakdown in the shared focus necessary for sprint success. Conversely, a team that is too small may lack the breadth of expertise required to complete the increment independently. By maintaining this team size, you enable the group to remain nimble enough to pivot when necessary, while providing enough cognitive power to solve complex domain problems. Ultimately, the team functions as a single entity rather than a loose collection of specialists reporting to a manager, which changes the nature of accountability. Central to the effectiveness of any Scrum team is the principle of self-management, which dictates that the group possesses the authority to govern its internal processes. In a self-managing team, the members decide internally who performs a specific task, the sequence in which those tasks occur, and the methodologies used to achieve their goals. This is a significant departure from traditional command and control structures, requiring a fundamental shift in how institutional trust is distributed. As a facilitator, you must recognize that self-management does not mean the absence of structure, but rather the presence of internal discipline and shared ownership of outcomes. When developers are empowered to make these operational decisions, their investment in the quality and timeliness of the delivery generally increases. This autonomy is not a privilege to be granted, but an inherent characteristic of a functional Scrum environment where professionals are expected to align their methods with their professional judgment. By removing external interference in their day-to-day workflow, you allow the team to respond more effectively to the empirical feedback gathered during sprints. Cross-functionality is the practical engine that allows a team to deliver value without relying on persistent external dependencies. A cross-functional team contains all the skills necessary to turn product backlog items into a done, usable increment within a single sprint. This does not necessarily imply that every individual must be a generalist who is equally proficient in every single technical domain. Instead, it means that the collective skills present within the group are sufficient to cover the entire spectrum of work required to satisfy the definition of done. When a team lacks a specific skill, such as testing, design, or specialized security knowledge, they become beholden to external departments, which introduces massive latency and handoff risks. Building an effective team requires recognizing these gaps early and actively working to foster a culture of cross-skilling or careful hiring to address them. The goal is to move the team toward a state where they are largely self-sufficient, thereby protecting the sprint cadence from the unpredictability of outside resource availability. The interplay between the Scrum Master, product owner, and developers forms a tripod of mutual influence that, when aligned, creates a stable environment of trust and transparency. The product owner provides the direction and the why, The developers provide the how and the work, and the Scrum Master provides the framework and the environment for continuous improvement. If this relationship is viewed as a hierarchy rather than a collaboration, transparency suffers because teams will hide problems to avoid bureaucratic consequences. Trust is built through actions, specifically the consistent delivery of value and the honesty displayed when the team faces inevitable technical or systemic setbacks. Transparency is an outcome of this trust. It exists when the work, the progress, and the impediments are visible to all stakeholders at all times. When the Scrum Master protects this transparency, it enables the empirical nature of the framework to surface reality rather than the narratives we might prefer to believe. Beyond the internal team structure, effective dynamics also depend on how the group navigates the broader organizational landscape. The organization often imposes constraints, processes, and systemic dependencies that threaten to erode the autonomy of the Scrum team. A mature team recognizes that they exist within a larger system and proactively manages these interfaces rather than being passively consumed by them. This requires the team to advocate for their needs while remaining empathetic to the strategic realities of the company at large. Effective alignment involves ensuring that the team's ongoing work consistently maps back to the strategic goals of the organization, thereby demonstrating the direct value of the Scrum process to management. By continuously clearing the path of organizational blockers and communicating the team's needs with clarity, you ensure that the team's velocity is not hampered by external noise. Your role is often to serve as a bridge between the deep focus required inside the team and the broader corporate requirements outside, ensuring both remain compatible. I look forward to our next discussion on leadership. Welcome back. We are now turning our focus to the pragmatic application of servant leadership within the Scrum framework. The concept of a servant leader is often misinterpreted in commercial settings as a passive role. Yet in the context of Scrum, it is a highly active and intentional stance. A Scrum Master serves the team not by dictating tasks, but by fostering an environment where the team can flourish autonomously. This requires a shift in mindset from traditional command and control management toward one of enablement and removing systemic friction. When you act as a servant leader, your primary objective is to clear the path for the developers so that they remain unencumbered by organizational distractions or technical roadblocks. You are essentially an architect of the team's working environment, ensuring that the necessary conditions for self-management are present and maintained at all times. This means you must possess a high degree of emotional intelligence to sense when a team is struggling with scope creep or when their focus has dangerously drifted away from the sprint goal. Your authority is derived not from a job title, but from your ability to influence the team's behavior and the organization's culture toward empirical process control. Facilitation is a cornerstone of this service, particularly during the various Scrum events that form the heartbeat of the framework. Rather than acting as a meeting chairperson, a servant leader ensures that these events are effective, positive, and strictly contained within their designated time boxes. If a daily Scrum is descending into a lengthy status update session for management, your role is to gently pivot the conversation back to the team's progress toward the sprint goal. This facilitation extends to the way the team views their own cross-functionality, as you must constantly encourage members to step outside their comfort zones to pick up necessary work items. By coaching the team towards self-management, you gradually make your own presence less critical to the team's daily heartbeat, which is the ultimate mark of a successful servant leader. Your interaction with the product owner is equally vital and requires a distinct set of skills centered on clarity and strategic alignment. A servant leader supports the product owner by identifying and implementing techniques for effective product backlog management, ensuring that the team understands why transparency in the backlog is non-negotiable. When backlogs become bloated or ambiguous, you help the team appreciate the necessity of clear, concise items that allow for better empirical planning in complex environments. This doesn't mean you manage the backlog for them, but rather that you provide the frameworks and questioning techniques that empower them to maintain a high-value list. You are helping them navigate the inherent complexity of their domain by ensuring that every conversation about product requirements is grounded in value delivery and the current realities of the marketplace. One of your most visible responsibilities involves the relentless removal of impediments that threaten the team's momentum or the quality of the increments they produce. Many aspiring Scrum Masters mistakenly believe this means taking over technical issues, but true servant leadership requires you to support the team while they maintain ownership of their solutions. If a team is hampered by bureaucratic processes, physical workspace constraints, or conflicting external priorities, your intervention is necessary to protect their focus. Ensuring that the team adheres to the definition of done is also an act of servant leadership, as a poorly defined or inconsistently applied standard will inevitably lead to technical debt and loss of trust. By holding the line on quality, you prevent the team from burning out under the weight of rework, thus serving the long-term sustainability of the product delivery effort. Ultimately, this role demands that you act as a mirror to the team, allowing them to see their own patterns and behaviors clearly. You provide the constructive feedback loop that characterizes a high-performing team, always pushing for transparency and relentless improvement. It is not about being liked, but about being useful, ensuring that the Scrum values of commitment, focus, openness, respect, and courage are woven into every interaction. As you prepare for your certification, remember that the Scrum Master is a leader who chooses to lead from behind, placing the success of the team and the value of the increment above personal recognition. This, in essence, is the practical demonstration of the accountability you're being tested on. I look forward to exploring the complexities of professional conflicts with you in our next session. Welcome back. In this chapter, we will explore the nuances of managing professional conflicts to ensure team cohesion. Conflict is often misunderstood as inherently destructive in a software development environment, yet it is a natural byproduct of collaboration. When intelligent people express diverging opinions on architectural choices or task prioritization, we witness productive friction that can lead to better outcomes. However, the Scrum Master must distinguish between this healthy debate and interpersonal toxicity that erodes the team's ability to deliver. Your responsibility is to foster an environment where team members feel safe enough to voice disagreements without fear of retribution or personal attack. This psychological safety forms the bedrock of a high-performing team, as it allows for the transparency necessary to inspect and adapt the way people work together. Without this foundation, underlying tension often manifests as hidden blockers, which significantly degrade productivity. To manage these dynamics, you should utilize the Scrum values of respect, openness, and courage as your primary frame of reference. When a conflict begins to simmer, ask yourself if the team members are maintaining respect for one another's professional competence. Openness requires that individuals share their concerns early, rather than letting silence turn into resentment over time. Sometimes, you may need to invite individuals to display the courage required to have difficult conversations directly, rather than relying on you as a mediator. By grounding these interactions in core values, you steer the focus away from ego and back toward the objective, the successful delivery of the increment. Your goal is not to eradicate all differences of opinion, as that would stifle innovation, but to create a container where those differences lead to progress. One of the most important behaviors for a Scrum Master is knowing when not to intervene. A common mistake is stepping in to solve every minor disagreement, which inadvertently teaches the team to be dependent on your facilitation. Instead, you should coach the team in self-solving mechanisms so that they learn to resolve issues through direct communication. If you solve every dispute, you deny the team the opportunity to develop the maturity and emotional intelligence required to sustain themselves. Your intervention is necessary when a discussion turns toxic, becomes circular without resolution, or starts to impact the team's commitment to their sprint goal. Think of your role as that of a gardener. You provide the conditions for growth, but you do not force the plants to grow for them. Detecting team dysfunctions requires a keen eye for subtle signals, such as consistently quiet members during meetings or a decline in collaborative spirit. These issues often arise when the team lacks trust or has become overly compartmentalized in their approach to tasks. When you see a team struggling, apply Scrum-based solutions that promote unity, such as focusing on the shared accountability of the sprint goal. Remind the team that the product owner and the developers share a singular goal, which often helps neutralize individual agendas. Your role also involves acting as a shield against external interference, such as unplanned work or organizational pressure, which can exacerbate internal stressors. By protecting the boundary of the team, you maintain the focus required for the team to navigate their internal conflict resolution process effectively. See you in the next lesson. Welcome back to our journey through the Scrum framework, where we will now focus on the sprint as the primary container for all development activities. In this lesson, we will deconstruct the sprint as the fundamental heartbeat of Scrum, exploring why this fixed-length event is essential for creating consistency and value delivery. The sprint is a fixed-length event of 1 month or less during which a usable and potentially releasable product increment is created. By keeping this duration consistent, teams establish a predictable cadence that reduces complexity and creates an opportunity for regular inspection and adaptation. When one sprint concludes, the next begins immediately without any gap in between, which ensures that the team maintains momentum and avoids the overhead of restarting processes. Within this container, all the operational mechanics of Scrum, including sprint planning, the daily Scrum, the sprint review, and the sprint retrospective, take place. These events are not peripheral activities, but are integral components that allow the team to manage their work effectively toward the sprint goal. You can think of the sprint as a localized, repetitive loop that bounds the risk of development to a maximum of 1 month. This constraints-based approach forces the team to confront reality frequently rather than hiding behind long-term, unverifiable plans. During the sprint, we must protect the integrity of the objective, meaning that no changes should be made that would endanger the sprint goal. This does not imply that the work is set in stone at the beginning, but rather that the objective remains stable enough for the team to focus their efforts. While development is underway, it is the responsibility of the developers to ensure that quality does not decrease, regardless of the pressure to finish tasks. At the same time, the product backlog is often dynamic, and refinement continues as a collaborative effort involving both the developers and the product owner. It is entirely acceptable for the scope to be clarified or even renegotiated with the product owner as more is learned during the sprint execution. This mechanism provides a buffer against the discovery of new information, allowing the team to trade scope in exchange for maintaining the core focus defined by the goal. If the work proves to be different than initially anticipated, this negotiation happens transparently within the boundaries of the sprint. When considering the length of a sprint, we need to balance the benefits of shorter cycles against the risks of long ones. A shorter sprint, such as 1 or 2 weeks, creates a tighter feedback loop that increases transparency and allows the team to pivot quickly based on the completed increment. Because there is less time between planning and delivery, the team is forced to break items down into smaller, more manageable pieces, which naturally improves technical execution. Conversely, longer sprints might appear to offer more breathing room, but they frequently lead to a false sense of security and a delayed realization of potential problems. When a sprint is too long, the risk of the team building something that no longer meets the market need increases significantly as the feedback lag becomes too great. By constraining the sprint duration, we minimize the amount of effort that can be potentially wasted if the direction needs to change. Ultimately, the sprint is the mechanism that transforms abstract ideas into tangible value within the Scrum environment. By viewing it as a container, you prevent the scattering of effort and ensure that every action taken by the developers serves the purpose of reaching the sprint goal. As a Scrum Master, your role is to ensure these boundaries are respected by everyone, including external stakeholders who might be tempted to introduce changes that disrupt the team's focus. You must cultivate an environment where the predictability of the sprint cycle is viewed as an asset rather than a bureaucratic constraint. When the team understands that they only have a short window to produce a quality increment, their decision-making process shifts toward pragmatism and efficiency. We are not just performing tasks. We are operating within a disciplined structure designed to expose obstacles early. By mastering the dynamics of this container, you provide the team with the psychological and practical space required to perform their best work. I look forward to seeing you in the next lecture. Welcome back. Today we examine the mechanics and the underlying purpose of sprint planning, a foundational event in the Scrum framework. Sprint planning exists to define what can be delivered in the upcoming sprint and how that work will be achieved. It is a collaborative event involving the entire Scrum team, where the developers, the product owner, and the Scrum Master synchronize their understanding of the upcoming goals. The event is time-boxed to a maximum of 8 hours for a 1-month sprint, with shorter sprints requiring proportionally less time. As a Scrum Master, your primary responsibility is to ensure that the event takes place, that participants understand its purpose, and that the team stays within the designated time box. You facilitate the environment where this critical planning can occur, ensuring the meeting remains focused and productive for everyone involved. The first topic of discussion is the sprint goal, which answers the fundamental question of why the current sprint is valuable to the business. The product owner plays a central role here by proposing how the sprint could most effectively increase the product goal during the coming sprint. By engaging the entire Scrum team in this discussion, the product owner ensures that the proposed value is not just a collection of tasks, but a coherent objective that moves the product forward. If the team does not arrive at a shared understanding of the value they intend to provide, they risk fragmenting their efforts. A clear sprint goal acts as a North Star for the developers, providing them with enough flexibility to adjust their plans during the sprint while keeping the ultimate value proposition in sight. Once the goal is established, the team must address what can be done during the sprint by selecting items from the product backlog. The developers are the sole authority on determining how much work they can reasonably take on, based on their capacity and their past velocity. They inspect the product backlog items, clarifying requirements with the product owner as needed to ensure the scope is well understood. It is important to note that the developers are responsible for this selection process, as they are the ones who must perform the actual labor. The Scrum Master must ensure that the team does not succumb to external pressure to overcommit, which is a common pitfall that often leads to a failure in delivering a quality increment by the end of the sprint. The final part of the planning process focuses on defining how the chosen work will be executed. The developers decompose selected product backlog items into smaller, actionable tasks that represent the work required to produce an increment. This is where the team turns intangible requirements into concrete actions, often estimating the effort involved to ensure transparency about the remaining work. The Scrum Master monitors the process to ensure the developers maintain a healthy level of internal collaboration rather than siloing tasks individually. By the end of this discussion, the team should have a functioning plan for the first few days of the sprint and a general direction for the remainder of the session. This plan is not a static contract, but a living guide that the developers can adapt as they learn more about the work throughout the sprint. Effective planning requires discipline, as the 8-hour limit is a maximum, not a target duration. If the team can reach a solid plan in 2 hours, there is no need to stretch the meeting to fill the allotted time. The Scrum Master keeps the session moving by preventing long-winded technical debates that should be handled during the sprint itself. Should the discussion veer into excessive technical implementation details that don't serve the planning goal, it is your job to gently steer the team back toward the main objective. Your goal as the Scrum Master is to create a setting where the product owner and the developers can reach a sustainable agreement on the plan. This requires a balanced approach where you neither dictate the plan nor remain entirely passive while the team struggles with communication. See you in the next session. Welcome back. In this lesson, we will focus on the mechanics and the underlying purpose of the daily Scrum to ensure you can expertly guide teams toward high-performance collaboration. The daily Scrum functions as a strictly defined 15-minute event designed exclusively for the developers on the Scrum team. Its primary objective is to inspect the current progress toward the sprint goal and adapt the sprint backlog accordingly for the next 24 hours. By consistently holding this meeting at the same time and location, the team minimizes complexity and establishes a reliable rhythm for communication. While the Scrum Master is responsible for ensuring that the event takes place, their participation is governed by the servant leader principle of teaching the team why the 15-minute time box matters. It is imperative to remember that this is an internal planning session rather than an external status report. When the event is allowed to balloon into an hour-long status update for stakeholders, the core value of immediate, team-driven adaptation is lost. Many organizations fall into the trap of using this time as a progress check for management, which fundamentally undermines the self-managing nature of the developers. As a Scrum Master, your role involves coaching the team to focus their dialogue on the sprint goal rather than simply reciting a list of tasks performed yesterday. The conversation should center on how the team's current progress aligns with the intended outcome and what adjustments are required to maintain that momentum. If a developer reports that a specific technical dependency is blocking their current work, the team must identify this impediment immediately. The goal is not just to talk about problems, but to create a plan that effectively clears the path for the remainder of the sprint. This shift in perspective turns a passive report into an active replanning exercise. Efficiency in this event requires discipline, particularly regarding the 15-minute boundary that the Scrum Guide mandates. When a team consistently struggles to finish within this time frame, it usually indicates that the scope of the discussion has strayed into detailed problem-solving rather than high-level planning. As a coach, you should observe the dynamics and suggest that detailed technical deep dives be moved to separate breakout sessions occurring immediately after the daily Scrum. By segregating complex problem-solving from the synchronization event, you keep the meeting focused, inclusive, and respecting of everyone's time. A well-facilitated daily Scrum leaves the team with a clear understanding of the next day's priorities and a renewed sense of collective ownership over their targets. Clarity is the output, and speed is a natural byproduct of focusing only on what is strictly necessary to achieve the sprint goal. It is vital to understand that the Scrum Master does not need to facilitate or even attend every meeting once the developers have mastered the format. If the Scrum Master's presence is required to keep the meeting moving or to prevent it from turning into a status meeting, then the team has not yet reached the level of maturity required for effective self-management. Your pedagogical objective is to coach the developers to recognize when they have strayed from their goal and to autonomously adjust their tactics to get back on track. When the team leads the event themselves, it increases transparency and reinforces the accountability of the developers as a single, cohesive unit. You are not the conductor of a performance. You are the architect of a process that functions precisely because you have taught the team how to maintain it. See you in the next lecture. Welcome back. In this session, we will examine the sprint review, an essential event dedicated to inspecting the sprint's outcome and determining necessary adaptations for the future. The primary purpose of a sprint review is to facilitate a transparent evaluation of the increment produced during the sprint. While many teams mistakenly treat this event as a simple demonstration or a status meeting for stakeholders, it is fundamentally a working session. The Scrum team presents the tangible evidence of their progress toward the product goal, allowing stakeholders to gain a clear understanding of the current state of the product. This collaboration is crucial because it ensures that those who have a vested interest in the product understand the reality of the development state. By sharing the increment, the team creates an environment where transparency is not just theorized, but actively practiced. This high level of visibility is what ultimately allows for informed decision-making and alignment between the team and the broader organization. During this event, the participants are meant to examine more than just the technical software or features delivered. The Scrum team and stakeholders perform an analysis of how the external environment has shifted, such as changes in the market, competitor actions, or evolving usage patterns. If the marketplace has moved, or if a global event has disrupted previous assumptions, the conversation naturally turns to whether the remaining work still holds its original value. This is where the collaborative spirit comes into play, as the attendees work together to determine the next logical steps for the product. It is therefore entirely appropriate to adjust the product backlog during the sprint review if new opportunities or threats come to light. The team does not work in a vacuum, and this ceremony ensures that they remain tethered to the shifting needs of their users and stakeholders. When considering the logistical constraints of this event, we must look at the concept of time boxing to ensure efficiency. For a one-month sprint, the sprint review is limited to a maximum of 4 hours, with shorter sprints requiring proportionally less time. This constraint exists to prevent the session from becoming an exhaustive, bureaucratic exercise that drains the team's energy without providing actual value. A tightly focused session forces all participants to prioritize the most impactful conversations rather than getting bogged down in minutiae. As a Scrum Master, your role is to ensure that the event remains collaborative rather than becoming a performance art piece designed to impress management. If the focus shifts toward a polished presentation rather than an honest assessment, the team loses the opportunity for critical feedback that defines the spirit of empirical process control. Ultimately, the sprint review serves as the primary gateway for empiricism via inspection and adaptation at the conclusion of a sprint. By inviting stakeholders, the Scrum team secures the alignment necessary to pursue the product goal with confidence. If everyone leaves the room with a shared mental model of what has been built and what needs to change, the event has been a resounding success. This shared understanding reduces the risk of building features that no longer offer utility and increases the likelihood that subsequent sprints will focus on the most valuable tasks. Transparency regarding the product and the environment allows the team to pivot with agility instead of blindly following a plan that may have become obsolete. Remember that this session is an investment of time intended to build trust and ensure that every member of the organization is pulling in the same direction. See you in the next lecture. Welcome back. We are now diving into the mechanics of the sprint retrospective, which serves as a crucial mechanism for team improvement. The sprint retrospective is designed specifically for the Scrum team to inspect itself. Its primary purpose is to plan concrete ways to increase product quality and organizational effectiveness. Think of this event as the deliberate pause necessary to reflect on the recent past. You are looking back at how the last sprint unfolded, specifically examining the dynamics between individuals, their interactions, the processes employed, the tools utilized, and the established definition of done. Because every team operates within a unique domain, these elements will naturally vary from one Scrum team to another. A team building medical software will have different operational concerns than a team managing a marketing campaign, and the retrospective must capture that specific context. By focusing on these categories, the team generates a comprehensive view of their internal reality. This holistic view is the raw material required to identify opportunities for meaningful growth. Once the inspection phase is complete, the team moves toward the identification of improvements. Not all ideas are created equal, so the Scrum team must prioritize and identify the most helpful changes to boost their effectiveness. Often, teams make the mistake of listing too many action items, which leads to stagnation rather than progress. You should help the team identify the one or two most impactful improvements that can be addressed as soon as possible. When these improvements are high leverage, they are often added directly to the sprint backlog for the upcoming sprint to ensure they receive the same focus as product work. By integrating these improvements into the workflow, the team ensures that the retrospective leads to tangible change rather than just a venting session. This transition from reflection to execution is what separates mediocre teams from high-performing ones. As a Scrum Master, your role here is to facilitate this process, ensuring that the environment remains positive and productive. It is very easy for a team to fall into finger-pointing or defensive posturing when discussing failures, but you must steer the conversation toward professional solutions. You are not there to dictate what the team should change, but rather to provide the structure that allows them to discover those changes themselves. The event is time-boxed to a maximum of 3 hours for a 1-month sprint, with shorter durations for shorter sprints. This time box is a constraint to encourage efficiency and focus on operational excellence. By keeping the session within these bounds, you respect the team's time and enforce a culture of being concise and actionable. Your facilitation skill is the catalyst that allows the team to sustain a culture of continuous improvement. Remember that the retrospective is focused exclusively on the team's internal health. It is not an event for external stakeholders or management to audit the team's performance. When external parties are present, the level of transparency typically drops, which defeats the purpose of the event. Protecting the safety of the retrospective is a core component of your servant leadership. If the team does not feel safe to discuss their processes and potential failures openly, they will not reach the deep insights necessary for growth. Maintain the integrity of this space by ensuring that only the Scrum team participates. Through consistent practice of this event, the team builds the habit of self-correction, which is ultimately the strongest indicator of a mature Scrum team. I will see you in the next lesson. Welcome back. Today we examine the rigid constraints that define the heartbeat of Scrum through the lens of empirical process control. Timeboxing is not merely a scheduling preference, but a fundamental structural requirement of the Scrum framework. By imposing finite durations on events, we create a recurring cadence that forces transparency and limits work in progress, which is essential for healthy inspection and adaptation cycles. If we allow meetings to expand indefinitely, we lose the motivation to remain concise and focused on the necessary outcomes. Think of timeboxing as a buffer against Parkinson's law, which suggests that work expands to fill the time available for its completion. When you're preparing for your exam, you must memorize the maximum durations allowed for a 1-month sprint, as questions will frequently test your understanding of these specific boundaries. The sprint itself is at most a 1-month container that encompasses all other events, serving as the primary rhythm for delivering value. Sprint planning is restricted to a maximum of 8 hours for a 1-month sprint, a duration that is meant to be scaled down for shorter sprints proportionately. It provides a structured space for the entire Scrum team to determine what can be delivered and how that value will be created. If a team finds itself consistently hitting this 8-hour limit, it often points to a lack of preparation regarding the product backlog or a failure to reach clarity on the sprint goal. The daily Scrum, conversely, is strictly limited to 15 minutes, designed solely for the developers to inspect progress toward the sprint goal and adjust their plan for the next 24 hours. This event is not a status update for stakeholders, nor is it a deep dive technical design session, and the Scrum Master must coach the team to protect this brief window to maintain its effectiveness. Anything beyond 15 minutes usually indicates that the team is drifting into detailed problem solving rather than coordination. The sprint review serves as the final event for the team to inspect the increment and adapt the product backlog, with a maximum of 4 hours for a 1-month sprint. During this time, the Scrum team and stakeholders collaborate on what was done and what should be done next, keeping the focus on the product rather than individual performance. Finally, the sprint retrospective is capped at 3 hours for a 1-month sprint, providing the team space to inspect their own processes, tools, and quality of work. This is the only formal event where the Scrum team focuses strictly on their internal ways of working, separate from the product discussions. As a Scrum Master, your role is to ensure these time boxes are respected, as they maintain the Goldilocks zone of engagement where the team has enough time to inspect properly, but not so much that the session loses its urgency or purpose. Coaching the organization or the team to respect these boundaries requires a firm grasp of the underlying empiricism. When you encounter stakeholders who want to extend a sprint review into an all-day affair, you must remind them that the time box is intended to keep the focus sharp and the feedback loop short. If we consistently exceed these boundaries, we signal to the system that the framework is flexible, which inevitably leads to a degradation of the empirical process. It is your responsibility to explain that these limits exist to prevent waste and to ensure that people do not become fatigued by excessive attendance in meetings that lack clear focus. By upholding these constraints, you are effectively preserving the structural integrity of the team and protecting their ability to perform meaningful, high-focus work. Understanding the relationship between the time box and the length of the sprint is critical for anyone aiming to clear the certification exam on the first pass. You should treat the maximums, such as 4 hours for the sprint review, as absolute ceilings that should rarely be approached, let alone exceeded, in a well-functioning team. As you gain experience, you will learn that effective teams often finish these events well within their assigned time boxes, which is a sign of high maturity and efficient communication. For the exam, memorize these values, but also internalize the reasoning behind them, as the questions often present scenarios where you must choose the response that best protects the integrity of the Scrum events. Timeboxing is the scaffolding that holds the complex environment of product development in a manageable form. I look forward to discussing the next topic with you. Welcome back. Let's discuss the intricacies of managing the product backlog to ensure your team has a clear, ordered path to delivering value. The product backlog is fundamentally an emergent, ordered list of work that encompasses everything needed to improve the product. It functions as the single source of truth for all work undertaken by the Scrum team, preventing the common trap of having hidden tasks or side projects outside of the team's primary focus. When we speak of the backlog as emergent, we acknowledge that it is never truly finished. It changes in response to feedback, market shifts, and technical discoveries throughout the product lifecycle. The ordering of this list is critical because it dictates what the team works on next, ensuring that the highest possible value is realized as soon as possible. Because it is the only source of requirements for any changes to be made to the product, all stakeholders must align on this single artifact. If a piece of work is not in the product backlog, it simply does not exist for the Scrum team. Maintaining this clarity is essential for sustainable progress and keeps the team focused on a singular, unified outcome. To avoid wandering aimlessly, the product backlog must have a specific target known as the product goal. This goal serves as the commitment for the product backlog, acting as the long-term objective that the Scrum team pursues through their iterative efforts. Without a clearly defined product goal, the backlog easily becomes a mere collection of disconnected tickets and tasks that lack a coherent direction. By orienting the backlog around an actionable future state, the team can better evaluate which items bring them closer to their target and which are mere noise or distraction. This commitment forces the product owner and the developers to negotiate the contents of the backlog based on how effectively those items contribute to the overarching vision. It provides the necessary focus needed to plan effectively during each sprint. Think of the product goal as the guiding star that justifies the existence of every item within the backlog, anchoring the team's daily efforts in something larger than the immediate technical implementation. Refinement is how we translate high-level, sometimes vague requirements into actionable, small, and precise items that the team can reasonably attempt during a sprint. This is not a one-time event, but an ongoing, collaborative activity where the product owner and the developers analyze the backlog items to add necessary details. During these sessions, the team might discuss descriptions, clarify acceptance criteria, reach consensus on sizing, and confirm the relative order of importance. Effective refinement turns large, ambiguous requests into granular chunks that are much easier to estimate and implement, thereby reducing risk during the actual sprint. When items are appropriately broken down, the overhead of implementation decreases because the developers have a much clearer understanding of what is expected. This activity also serves as a crucial feedback loop where developers can surface technical constraints or dependencies early on. By constantly refining only a portion of the backlog, the team stays agile, keeping enough depth in order to maintain flow without spending unnecessary time on low-priority items prematurely. Attributes assigned to backlog items are entirely context-dependent, meaning they vary based on the specific domain of work or the nature of the product. While one team might prioritize complex technical documentation or strict regulatory compliance notes, another might focus on user experience personas or latency metrics. There is no rigid, platform-imposed rule on what information must live within a backlog item, as long as that information provides clarity and ensures transparency regarding the work. The product owner remains ultimately responsible for the existence and the ordering of these items, as they hold the accountability for maximizing the value of the product. However, the Scrum Master plays a vital role here by helping to optimize the management techniques the team uses to handle this backlog. A skilled Scrum Master will help the team identify bottlenecks in their refinement processes or suggest better ways to represent their work. By focusing on these management techniques, the Scrum Master ensures that the team spends less time fighting with their tools and more time creating valuable increments. I look forward to discussing how these concepts impact the sprint backlog in our next session. Hello. In this lesson, we will explore the sprint backlog and its critical role in facilitating transparency and focus for the development team. The sprint backlog functions as a cohesive plan created by and for the developers, encompassing the sprint goal, selected items from the product backlog, and the specific plan for delivering an increment. It represents why we are building the product, what specific features we intend to implement, and how we technically plan to achieve those outcomes. Because software development is inherently empirical, the sprint backlog is not a static document that gets filed away after planning concludes. Instead, it serves as a highly visible, real-time snapshot of the current work state, evolving continuously as the team discovers new technical requirements or constraints. This dynamism is necessary because rigid adherence to an initial plan often leads to technical debt or the delivery of irrelevant features that fail to solve the user's actual problem. By maintaining this visibility, the team ensures that everyone, including the Scrum Master and product owner, understands exactly where the project stands at any given moment. This transparency allows for the frequent inspection and adaptation required by the Scrum framework to remain effective. Central to this artifact is the sprint goal, which acts as the singular objective for the sprint. The goal provides the team with a shared sense of purpose, helping them navigate complex decisions without needing to constantly revisit the full product vision. While the selected items and the specific execution plan are flexible and can be adapted by the developers as they learn more, the sprint goal itself is immutable for the duration of the sprint. This immutability is crucial because it protects the team from scope creep and prevents the dilution of focus that occurs when constant changes are introduced mid-cycle. Adapting the plan does not mean changing the outcome, but rather adjusting the path we take to reach that destination. If a team finds that they cannot meet the sprint goal due to unforeseen complications, they must collaborate with the product owner to reconsider their scope while maintaining the integrity of the commitment. This balance between a fixed objective and an adaptive methodology is what distinguishes professional Scrum from mere task management. The level of detail required within the sprint backlog should be high enough to allow the team to inspect their progress effectively during the daily Scrum. If the plan lacks clarity, the daily Scrum risks becoming a status meeting rather than a synchronization point for navigating the path toward the sprint goal. You might imagine the sprint backlog as a map for a journey where the destination is fixed, but the terrain often shifts unexpectedly due to weather conditions. Developers use this map to discuss obstacles, reallocate tasks based on new findings, and refine their approach to ensure they can deliver a tangible, high-quality increment by the end of the time box. Maintaining this level of detail is a collaborative effort that relies on the team's professional maturity and their ability to communicate effectively about their work. It is not something the Scrum Master manages for them, but rather an artifact that the developers curate to maintain their own sense of flow and accountability. As you prepare for your certification, remember that the artifact exists to support the practitioners, not the other way around. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to this exploration of how we construct valuable increments. In this lesson, we will examine the mechanics of building increments that serve as functional, verified stepping stones toward your product goal. An increment is fundamentally defined as a concrete stepping stone toward the product goal. When we speak about an increment in Scrum, we are not merely discussing a collection of tasks or a status update on a Jira board. Instead, we are looking at a functional piece of software or a tangible product artifact that adds real, measurable value to the existing work. Each new increment must be additive to all prior increments, meaning it does not exist in isolation, but rather integrates into a cohesive whole. This requirement for integration ensures that the product remains a unified entity rather than a disjointed collection of features. By ensuring that all increments work together, we maintain a code base or a product structure that is consistently stable and coherent. This is where the technical discipline of the developers becomes paramount, as they must manage dependencies and ensure that new functionality does not break existing features. Every piece of work must be thoroughly verified against the quality standards established by the Scrum team. If the verification is absent, the work cannot be classified as an increment, as it fails to provide the necessary reliability for ongoing development. For an increment to be truly valuable, it must be in a usable state at the end of the sprint. Usability suggests that the work is not merely a prototype or a conceptual sketch, but something that could, in theory, be put into the hands of a user. The Scrum framework does not mandate that you wait until the end of the sprint to release this value, though. You might find that your team is capable of delivering multiple increments within a single sprint, or perhaps you deliver a single, substantive increment well before the sprint ends. This flexibility highlights a common misconception. The sprint review is not a bureaucratic gate that must be cleared before value can be released to stakeholders. Rather, the sprint review is a collaborative working session where the sum of the increments created during the sprint is presented to facilitate empiricism. The empiricism part is critical because it allows the team and the stakeholders to inspect the current state of the product and adapt the product backlog accordingly. If we treat the review as a gate, we stifle the agility that the framework is designed to promote. At the center of this process is the definition of done, which serves as the formal commitment to the increment. Many teams treat the definition of done as a suggestion or a static document that rarely changes, but this is a significant misunderstanding of its purpose. It represents the quality baseline that every increment must satisfy before it can be considered functional or shippable. If an item in the backlog does not meet the definition of done, it is simply not an increment. It remains a work-in-progress task. This distinction is vital for preventing the accumulation of technical debt, which acts as a heavy anchor on future velocity and product quality. A Scrum Master's role here is to facilitate the conversation about quality, ensuring that the team understands that technical debt is a tax they pay on every subsequent sprint. When we focus on shippable quality artifacts, we ensure that the team is always ready to pivot, react to market feedback, or deploy a new feature without weeks of refactoring. Transparency is impossible if the product increments are hidden or if they possess unknown stability issues. When the developers, the product owner, and the Scrum Master can point to a functional increment, the entire team gains a shared understanding of where they stand regarding the product goal. This transparency is what empowers the sprint review to be a session of genuine inspection rather than a defensive status report. It allows everyone involved to look at the concrete evidence of progress and discuss the most impactful steps to take next. If the product is not in a usable state, the discussion quickly devolves into speculation and guesswork, which is the antithesis of the empirical process. By maintaining a clean, integrated, and verified state at all times, the team shifts from a rhythm of frantic integration to a steady, predictable output. This, in turn, builds trust with stakeholders and creates a more sustainable development environment for the team itself. Keep these principles in mind as you refine your understanding of artifacts. See you in the next lecture. Hello. Let us look at the concept of the definition of done and its role in maintaining product quality and transparency within the Scrum framework. The definition of done serves as a formal description of the state of an increment when it finally satisfies the necessary quality measures for the product. It acts as a clear, objective boundary that separates work that is merely in progress from work that is truly shippable or usable. Think of it as a shared agreement within the Scrum team regarding what it actually means to complete a task. Without this explicit understanding, developers might hold different interpretations of what completion entails, leading to technical debt and hidden requirements. The definition provides that necessary common ground, ensuring everyone operates with the same set of expectations and standards. By establishing this benchmark, the team gains a measurable way to track their progress and maintain a steady velocity. It effectively forces a conversation about quality during the beginning of the project, rather than leaving it as an afterthought. The moment a product backlog item fulfills the criteria outlined in the definition of done, an increment is officially born. This is a critical distinction in empirical process control because it marks the transformation of an idea into a tangible piece of value. If an item fails to meet these established criteria, it remains fundamentally incomplete and cannot be released or even presented during the sprint review. Instead of forcing a half-finished item forward, the team must return it to the product backlog for future consideration. This disciplined approach prevents the accumulation of unfinished work that often plagues traditional project management paths. It forces transparency because the stakeholders can see exactly what is done and what is not, without any ambiguity or speculation about current status. Transparency is only possible when you have an honest assessment of what characterizes a finished piece of work. When considering the source of your team's definition, you must first verify whether an organizational standard exists. If the definition of done is already part of the standards within your organization, then all Scrum teams within that organization are required to follow it as a minimum baseline. This creates a consistent level of quality across different products, which is particularly beneficial in large-scale enterprises with many moving parts. However, if such organizational standards are not in place, then the Scrum team takes on the responsibility of creating its own definition of done. This team-level creation process is an excellent opportunity for the developers to align their technical capabilities with the needs of the product owner. They must ensure that the definition captures the quality requirements that are appropriate for their specific product environment. In situations where a team creates their own definition, it is common to see them start with a simpler version and refine it as they learn more about their process. As the team matures and their technical practices improve, They may choose to tighten their definition of done to include more rigorous verification steps. This might involve adding automated testing requirements, specific security scans, or documentation standards that were not previously codified. The Scrum Master should facilitate this evolution by coaching the team to remain focused on both quality and transparency. You want the definition to be a living document that serves the team's professional goals rather than a static piece of bureaucracy that hinders progress. The objective is to make the quality standard high enough to satisfy the customer's needs without introducing unnecessary complexity that slows down delivery. Transparency is the bedrock of Scrum, and the definition of done provides the lens through which we view our increments. When we define quality explicitly, we provide a shared reference point that reduces friction during the sprint review. If everyone knows exactly what constitutes a done item, there is no need for awkward conversations about why a feature is not ready for prime time. It shifts the focus from individual opinions about completion to evidence-based metrics that the entire team has endorsed. When you have a solid definition, you gain the ability to inspect and adapt your development process with confidence. This, in turn, helps the team predict their capacity more accurately because they are not constantly dealing with the overhead of unfinished tasks that were incorrectly labeled as done. I look forward to discussing the next topic with you in the next session. Welcome back. In this lesson, we will examine the mechanisms for tracking progress in Scrum and how to distinguish between meaningful data and noise. When we talk about tracking progress in a Scrum environment, we must first anchor ourselves in empiricism. The Scrum Guide does not mandate specific tracking tools like burn-down charts, burn-up charts, or cumulative flow diagrams, and it is a common misconception that these are required for compliance. Instead, these artifacts are optional instruments designed to increase transparency and provide a foundation for inspection and adaptation. As a Scrum Master, your objective is not to enforce the use of a particular chart, but to ensure that the team has the necessary data to visualize their work. True progress in Scrum is binary in nature. Work is either done according to the definition of done, or it is not. Any work that remains in progress, regardless of how close to completion it appears, does not count toward the completion of a sprint goal or the product goal. Relying on partial completion metrics often leads to false positives, which masks risks rather than revealing them to the stakeholders. The product backlog and the sprint backlog serve as the primary sources of truth for tracking. These artifacts provide a real-time snapshot of the remaining work and the current state of the product increment. When we look at the product backlog, we're looking at the empirical evidence of the product owner's intent and the relative value of features. Conversely, the sprint backlog offers a granular view of the technical tasks and the plan for the current iteration. To track progress effectively, the team must consistently update these items as they navigate their work. If the data within these backlogs is stale, transparency suffers, rendering any subsequent charts or diagrams entirely misleading. Your role as a Scrum Master is to facilitate this habit within the team, ensuring that the act of updating the backlog is seen as an integral part of the development process rather than an administrative burden imposed by management. In professional practice, we often encounter the trap of vanity metrics versus actionable metrics. A vanity metric might look impressive, such as the total lines of code written or the number of tickets moved, but it rarely informs the next decision. An actionable metric, however, directly supports the empirical process by highlighting trends that lead to better forecast accuracy. For example, a burn-down chart can highlight a trend where velocity regularly decreases in the final days of a sprint, suggesting a bottleneck in testing or code review. By identifying such trends, the team can inspect their process and adapt their behaviors to improve future performance. For the product owner, these insights are crucial for high-level release planning, as they allow for more evidence-based forecasting rather than optimistic guessing. When we focus on data that supports learning, we move from simply monitoring activity to truly managing outcomes. You should consider how your team's current tracking methods contribute to their ability to self-manage. If the team spends more time maintaining complex spreadsheets or specialized tracking software than they do on product development, the process has become the master rather than the servant. The goal of any progress measurement technique is to make the state of affairs visible to those responsible for the outcome. If a simple post-it note on a physical board provides better visibility than a sophisticated digital tool, the physical board is objectively better for that specific team. As a Scrum Master, you serve as a coach who challenges the team to keep their tracking overhead low and their transparency high. By fostering this mindset, you empower the team to look at the facts, acknowledge their velocity, and make informed choices about how to best deliver value to their users. I will see you in the next lesson. Welcome back. Today, we are going to explore the critical relationship between transparency and the inspection of Scrum artifacts to ensure effective process control. Transparency is not merely a concept in Scrum. It is the fundamental prerequisite for empirical process control. If there is no transparency, the data used for inspection is inaccurate, which renders the resulting adaptation efforts useless or even harmful. When Scrum artifacts are opaque, the team is effectively navigating without a map, leading to skewed decision-making processes. Stakeholders and Scrum team members require a clear, shared reality to evaluate whether an increment provides value or if a project carries unmitigated risks. If the state of the product backlog, the sprint backlog, or the increment is misrepresented, the team cannot optimize value delivery. Consequently, transparency serves as the primary mechanism through which we expose the reality of our work so that we can make informed, evidence-based adjustments. Without this shared understanding, individual assumptions dominate, which often leads to misaligned efforts and a degradation in product quality over time. A Scrum Master must play an active role in fostering this transparency, not just within the Scrum team, but throughout the entire organization. This responsibility involves facilitating environments where everyone feels safe to admit to failures or display incomplete work. When you see a team hiding the true status of an increment during a sprint review, that is a clear indicator that transparency is lacking. You might observe patterns such as teams reporting a task as done when it does not actually meet the definition of done. Listening to the team is just as important as inspecting artifacts. If the conversations during the daily Scrum sound like status reporting rather than planning for the next 24 hours, transparency is likely being compromised. As a Scrum Master, you must challenge these behaviors by asking deep, open-ended questions that force the team to confront the actual state of their work. Your goal is to make the hidden risks visible so that the organization can address them before they escalate into systemic failures. Correcting transparency issues requires a mix of pedagogical influence and structural interventions at both the team and organizational levels. You start by coaching the team on the importance of the artifacts as living representations of the work, rather than static reports for external approval. If you notice the sprint backlog is not updated, you need to discuss the value of that board as a tool for the team, not as a command and control device for managers. Sometimes, low transparency is a symptom of a culture that punishes mistakes, which necessitates your intervention at a leadership level to shift the organizational mindset toward empiricism. Providing transparency also means ensuring that the information is accessible and understandable to those responsible for the inspection. If a stakeholder cannot interpret the product backlog, they cannot provide the necessary feedback required for maximizing the product's value. You must ensure that every Scrum event is supported by artifacts that are current, honest, and truly reflective of the state of the product. Effective inspection relies on the team having a common understanding of what constitutes a valuable increment. If the team ignores the definition of done, they create an illusion of progress that obscures the reality of technical debt. When you inspect an artifact, you're looking for evidence of learning, not just a confirmation of completion. If the daily Scrum is only used to list tasks performed, the team is missing the opportunity to inspect the sprint backlog for progress toward the sprint goal. The Scrum Master must act as a persistent advocate for this clarity by ensuring that artifacts are used to focus on what matters most to the product's success. When transparency is maximized, the resulting adaptation becomes a natural, logical step in the development process. Always remember that transparency is a continuous state of maintenance rather than a binary goal that you reach and then stop worrying about. I will catch you in the next session. Welcome back. In this chapter, we transition from the immediate needs of a single Scrum team to the broader, often more complex landscape of organizational change management and systemic influence. When we shift our focus to coaching the organization, we move beyond the boundaries of a self-managing team to address the environment in which that team operates. Many organizations adopt Scrum only at the team level while retaining a hierarchical command and control structure that actively stifles agility. A capable Scrum Master must act as a change agent, helping the organization understand that Scrum is not just a process to follow, but a framework for navigating complex work through empiricism. This requires you to speak the language of leadership, which is rarely about story points or velocity and almost always about organizational throughput, risk reduction, and time to market. You are essentially teaching management that their primary role in a Scrum environment is to provide the constraints within which teams can flourish rather than dictating the specific architecture or task sequence. This is where the concept of servant leadership transcends the team and becomes a tool for influencing executive decision-making. To lead an organization towards successfully adopting Scrum, you must first foster an understanding of complexity. You will often encounter stakeholders who view the world through a predictive, waterfall lens, expecting precise delivery dates for long-term projects while neglecting the reality of changing requirements. Coaching stakeholders involves demonstrating the value of iterative progress rather than promising static outcomes that inevitably lead to technical debt or misaligned products. You achieve this by making progress visible through transparency in artifacts and consistent delivery of high-quality increments. If you can help your organization see that empiricism is a risk mitigation strategy, you will find it significantly easier to secure the necessary patience and space for teams to experiment and learn. Helping them understand that they are managing a system, not just a set of individual workers, is a fundamental hurdle you must clear. Removing barriers between stakeholders and your Scrum teams is another critical aspect of this systemic responsibility. Organizational silos are perhaps the most common impediment to high-performing Scrum implementations, as they create handoffs that destroy value and slow down the feedback loop. You must identify where the organization imposes unnecessary processes, such as approval gates or departmental walls, that prevent developers from gathering the immediate feedback they need. Influencing change here does not mean you have the authority to rewrite the organizational chart, but rather that you possess the observational skills to hold a mirror up to the organization. You describe the current state, highlight the cost of the existing friction, and facilitate conversations where leaders realize that structural changes are necessary to support cross-functional teams. This often starts with something as simple as ensuring that stakeholders participate in the sprint review to witness the reality of the work. Scaling Scrum within an organization requires a balance between autonomy for multiple teams and the integrity of the framework itself. When you have multiple teams contributing to a single product, the risk of fragmentation increases, and you must coach the organization on how to maintain a cohesive product vision. This is not just about choosing a scaling framework, but about ensuring that the mechanisms of inspection and adaptation remain intact across all teams. You should focus on synchronizing goals and dependencies without creating layers of middle management that impede the flow of information. Your role is to ensure that the organization respects the Scrum accountabilities while allowing for enough team-level autonomy to keep motivation high. Success here relies on your ability to scale the Scrum values: courage, focus, commitment, respect, and openness, so they become the default behavioral standard for the entire enterprise. Managing this level of organizational change demands a high capacity for patience and the recognition that you are an influencer rather than a commander. An organization will not transform overnight, and you will frequently encounter resistance from entrenched interests who benefit from the status quo. Instead of attacking the existing structures, seek out opportunities to demonstrate success in small, manageable pilot initiatives. By facilitating these successes and making the benefits visible to leadership, you build the social capital required to propose deeper, more structural changes. Effectively coaching the organization is ultimately about shifting the mental model from one of resource management to one of value stream optimization. If you can maintain the integrity of Scrum while being pragmatic about the organizational constraints you face, you will provide the organization with the best possible chance of long-term sustainability. See you in the next lesson. Hello, and welcome back to our deep dive into the nuanced responsibilities of Scrum Master. Today, we are focusing specifically on the high-stakes task of removing complex impediments that go beyond routine daily blockers. To effectively navigate the landscape of impediments, a Scrum Master must first possess the ability to distinguish between a simple task-level problem and a systemic organizational hurdle. A team might struggle with a localized technical debt issue, which is generally a concern for the developers to manage within their self-organizing framework. Conversely, an impediment is often defined as an external disruption that sits outside the team's sphere of control or authority, preventing the team from reaching their sprint goal. If the team can solve the issue themselves, it is merely friction, not a true impediment requiring your intervention. Your primary goal is to foster autonomy by encouraging the team to exhaust their own problem-solving capabilities before you step into advocate on their behalf. Overfunctioning as a Scrum Master by shielding the team from every minor inconvenience actually stunts their growth and undermines the core principles of self-management. When you identify that an issue is truly systemic, you must categorize it to determine your next course of action. Internal impediments often involve team dynamics or workflow process inefficiencies that you can facilitate through retrospectives or one-on-one coaching dialogues. External impediments, however, are far more complex, as they typically involve bureaucratic red tape, conflicting organizational priorities, or absolute resource constraints beyond the team's reach. For these situations, you move from the role of a facilitator to that of a diplomat and negotiator operating across departmental silos. You are not a project manager assigning tasks, but rather a protector of the Scrum process who ensures that the organizational environment is conducive to empirical progress. This requires a firm yet collaborative stance, where you clearly articulate how these systemic blockers directly impact the delivery of value. Handling these higher-level blockers effectively requires a disciplined approach to root cause analysis, such as the 5 whys or fishbone diagrams. Often, what appears to be a lack of resources is actually a symptom of misaligned priorities or a misunderstanding of the product goal at the executive level. When dealing with difficult stakeholders or technical hurdles that threaten your long-term roadmap, you must base your arguments on data and transparency rather than emotion. If an organization values its current traditional processes more than its agility, you are going to encounter resistance, and your job is to negotiate access to the necessary resources or authority. Success in this area is less about forcing change and more about illustrating the cost of inaction, ensuring that leadership understands the trade-offs they are making. By consistently providing transparency regarding the impact of these impediments, you enable the organization to make informed decisions that eventually smooth the path for your team. See you in the next lecture. Welcome back to our journey towards Scrum Mastery. In this session, we will explore why Scrum is not limited to the realm of software development and how its core principles apply to any complex intellectual endeavor. A common misconception is that Scrum is intrinsically tethered to code, IDEs, and deployment pipelines. However, if we examine the Scrum Guide carefully, we find that the framework is intentionally agnostic regarding its domain of application. Complexity exists wherever there is uncertainty, whether you're drafting a marketing campaign, designing a piece of physical hardware, or structuring a curriculum for an educational program. At its heart, Scrum is a management framework for empirical process control, where transparency, inspection, and adaptation drive results. When you step outside of technology, you are essentially swapping bytes and commits for tangible outcomes like strategic plans, physical prototypes, or learning modules. The fundamental accountability of the Scrum Master remains unchanged. You are there to foster an environment where these empirical cycles can occur effectively. The adaptation process for non-software industries requires a careful reevaluation of your artifacts, specifically the definition of done. In software, done often implies unit testing, code review, and integration into a shared environment. In a marketing department, the definition of done might instead require compliance reviews, approval from stakeholders, and successful distribution to a target demographic. Similarly, for a hardware team, being done might mean a functional prototype tested against safety specifications or a final design document ready for mass production. You must work with the team to ensure that the definition of done remains a transparent, shared understanding of what it means for work to be usable. If you fail to define this clearly, the empirical loop breaks, as the team cannot inspect a product that is only half-formed or unclear in its quality expectations. The sprints themselves also undergo a shift in execution when we leave the software world. While a software team delivers a feature increment, an event planning team might deliver a logistical plan for a large-scale conference. The time box remains critical because it creates a consistent cadence for feedback, preventing the team from drifting into analysis paralysis for too long before showing their work to stakeholders. During a sprint review in these contexts, the focus remains on looking at the increment and discussing how the market or the organization has shifted. You're still inspecting the product and the market conditions to adapt the product backlog, even if that backlog now consists of research tasks rather than user stories. As long as you maintain the core structure of the events, you can accommodate practically any type of knowledge work. Consider the example of a research and development lab trying to improve efficiency. They might use a sprint to perform literature reviews, design experiments, and analyze initial data points. Their product is the set of discoveries or the validated experimental model. By holding a retrospective, the scientists and researchers can identify why certain communication channels failed or how to improve the accuracy of their data collection methods. The empirical process is essentially the scientific method applied to team management. Whether you're building an app or researching a chemical compound, the goal is to shorten the feedback loop so that you waste less time building the wrong thing or following a flawed hypothesis. Finally, ensure that your teams do not lose sight of the core value proposition of Scrum amidst the translation of terminology. Marketing teams often struggle with the word developer, but you should emphasize that developer simply refers to the people doing the work to create the value defined by the product owner. If a team is producing a report, those writing the report are the developers. The product owner remains the person maximizing the value generated by the team's output, regardless of whether that value is measured in revenue, customer satisfaction, or research breakthroughs. By maintaining this focus, you ensure that Scrum provides the same benefits of transparency and continuous improvement in every industry vertical you encounter. I will see you in the next lecture. Welcome back. Let us discuss how to approach your certification exam with a methodical strategy that prioritizes the logic of the Scrum framework over anecdotal experience. We will explore how to navigate exam patterns and distinguish between theoretical correctness and common workplace shortcuts. Passing the professional certification exams requires you to momentarily set aside the chaotic realities of your current workplace and adopt the perspective of the Scrum Guide. Many candidates fail because they project their own organizational dysfunctions onto the exam questions instead of answering based on the provided definition of the Scrum framework. The Scrum way is absolute and precise, while the real-world way is often compromise-driven, messy, and inconsistent. When you read a question, you must identify if the scenario describes a situation that violates a fundamental accountability or time box, according to official terminology. If a question asks what a Scrum Master should do when management demands a status report, your own past experience might suggest writing a quick summary. But the Scrum Master's role is to facilitate transparency and protect the team from external interference. You must evaluate every answer through the lens of Scrum values, focusing on how to uphold the framework rather than how to get things done effectively in a traditional hierarchy. The Scrum Guide is short, yet it is profoundly dense, and most successful candidates report that it only truly clicks after the third or fourth reading. Do not merely skim the text, for you must actively look for the specific verbs and accountabilities assigned to each role. When you encounter a question that focuses on roles and responsibilities, immediately deconstruct the prompt to see if the action proposed falls outside the remit of that specific role. For instance, the product owner is solely responsible for ordering the product backlog, and even if an organization allows developers to do this, the exam expects you to prioritize the accountability over the common practice. Practice assessments and simulators are invaluable tools, but their primary purpose is to expose gaps in your understanding rather than serve as a rote memorization tool. Use simulators to analyze why a particular answer was marked wrong, ensuring that you can map the reasoning directly back to a paragraph in the 2020 Scrum Guide. Time management during the exam is essentially a test of your ability to maintain focus under pressure without second-guessing your initial judgment. You will likely encounter questions that are deliberately designed with distractor answers, which are responses that sound perfectly reasonable but technically violate a Scrum rule. Watch out for phrases that suggest the Scrum Master is an administrative assistant, a project manager, or a supervisor of the development team, as these are classic trap answers. If you find yourself spending more than a minute on a single conceptual question, mark it for review and move on to the next item immediately. Returning to these complex questions with a fresh perspective at the end of the exam is often enough to reveal the subtle contradiction that you missed earlier. Keep in mind that the updates in the 2020 Scrum Guide streamline the language, removing explicit mentions of rigid practices to emphasize that Scrum is a framework rather than a prescriptive process. Servant leadership is a core theme that will permeate most scenario-based questions, and you must interpret this concept through the constraint of clear accountabilities. A servant leader does not simply do what the team wants, but instead removes impediments, facilitates decision-making, and ensures that the team understands the framework's intent. When a question provides a conflict scenario, always look for an answer that promotes self-management and transparency rather than one that suggests the Scrum Master should impose a solution. Strict adherence to time boxes at the event level is another common area where candidates fall short, as they often forget that time boxes are maximums, not minimums. If an event can be completed sooner, it should be, but it cannot be extended beyond the designated time box regardless of how much work remains. Focus on these structural boundaries as identifying characteristics of a correct answer, because they almost never rely on personal opinion or situational context. Use this strategic framework to guide your final preparations. See you in the next lecture. Welcome back. In this lesson, we will identify common dysfunctions that dilute the effectiveness of Scrum and learn how to steer teams back toward genuine agility. One of the most persistent issues you will encounter is the phenomenon often referred to as zombie Scrum. This occurs when organizations go through the motions of Scrum events, follow the terminology, and maintain the artifacts, yet completely fail to produce any real value or empiricism. It looks like Scrum from the outside, but it lacks the heartbeat of regular inspection and adaptation. When a team treats the sprint merely as a repetitive work cycle, without focusing on meaningful increments, they have effectively lost the purpose of the framework. Another frustrating variation is the presence of Scrum But, which usually manifests as a statement that we use Scrum, but we cannot do pair programming, or we use Scrum, but we do not have a dedicated product owner. These excuses are usually clear indicators that the team is unwilling to make the challenging behavioral changes required for successful agility. As a Scrum Master, your job is not to accept these limitations, but to expose the trade-offs that the organization is making when they choose to bypass essential Scrum components. A critical pitfall involves the confusion between the accountabilities of a Scrum Master and those of a traditional project manager. A Scrum Master who assigns tasks, tracks individual hours, or makes executive decisions is violating the core tenet of self-managed teams. When the product owner remains unavailable for the team, the feedback loop breaks immediately, resulting in work being done based on stale assumptions rather than fresh market reality. Similarly, the daily Scrum is frequently misused as a status report meeting where developers report progress to a manager instead of planning their own steps toward the sprint goal. This transition toward micromanagement is often labeled as dark Agile, where the tools of transparency are inverted to pressure individuals instead of supporting team flow. If you observe that your team is afraid to speak openly about impediments, it is a glaring sign that your environment is not fostering the safety required for true psychological ownership. Teams often attempt to save time by skipping the sprint retrospective, which is a strategic error that ensures existing problems are permanently baked into future processes. If a team feels that retrospectives are redundant, it is usually because they have not seen enough actionable outcomes from previous sessions to feel that their input matters. A parallel danger is the tendency to ignore the definition of done, which leads to the accumulation of technical debt and a false sense of achievement. When the definition of done is treated as a flexible guideline rather than a strict quality standard, the product increment fails to be truly usable. This often correlates with a pattern we call water scrum fall, where organizations place Scrum in the middle of a development phase, but keep it wrapped in rigid, legacy-style waterfall planning and handoff requirements. These layers of bureaucracy inevitably stifle the agility you're trying to cultivate within the team. The remedy for these dysfunctions lies in the consistent application of the 5 Scrum values of commitment: focus, openness, respect, and courage. A professional Scrum Master acts as an observer who helps the team and the organization recognize the gap between their current reality and the intended framework usage. You must have the courage to address these anti-patterns early before they become cultural norms that are drastically harder to unlearn. If the organization refuses to empower the team, your role is to make the consequences of that power vacuum transparent so that leadership understands the cost of their intervention. Do not prioritize a comfortable, status quo environment over the transparency required for improvement. By holding the line on the framework's intent, you protect the team's ability to actually perform, rather than just performing the appearance of productivity. See you in our next session. Welcome back. In this lecture, we will examine the history and iterative refinement of the Scrum framework to understand the intent behind its current structure. To understand the current Scrum Guide, we must look at the intellectual lineage, starting with the 1986 New Product Development Game paper by Takeuchi and Nanaka. That paper argued that traditional, sequential approaches to product development were insufficient for the speed and uncertainty of modern markets. Instead, they observed that high-performing teams resembled a rugby team, moving as a single unit and passing the ball back and forth. This metaphor transitioned into the workplace as a way to handle complex problems through iterative progress. Over the decades, Scrum formalized these concepts, shifting from a niche set of practices often confined to software development toward a broader framework applicable to any domain involving complexity. By tracing this evolution, you gain more than just historical trivia. You develop a deeper intuition for why the framework looks the way it does today. Significant changes in the 2020 Scrum Guide reflect a deliberate shift toward becoming a lighter, more inclusive, and less prescriptive document. One of the most discussed changes is the refinement of the language surrounding the Scrum Master role, moving away from being solely defined as a servant leader toward a true leader who serves. This change was intended to avoid the misconception that the Scrum Master is a passive administrative assistant or a subservient facilitator. By defining the Scrum Master as a true leader, the framework emphasizes the responsibility to guide the team by mentoring, coaching, and removing organizational impediments. Similarly, the shift from development team to simply developers acknowledges that within a Scrum team, there are no sub-teams or hierarchies. This change aims to foster collective ownership and shared accountability for the delivery of the product increment. The removal of prescriptive elements in recent updates was a strategic move to ensure Scrum remains adaptable outside of the IT industry. For years, people focused on the 3 questions during the daily Scrum, which often turned the event into a status report for the Scrum Master. The formal removal of those specific questions was designed to shift the focus back to the original purpose of the daily Scrum, which is alignment on progress toward the sprint goal. By detaching from rigid prescriptions, the framework invites practitioners to figure out what works best for their specific context. This emphasizes that Scrum is a process framework, not a static methodology, and it requires professional judgment to implement effectively. The objective is to center the conversation around the actual work and the remaining steps to reach the objective, rather than reporting individual activity to a perceived supervisor. Another major evolution is the introduction of specific commitments for each artifact, particularly the product goal. Previously, many teams treated the product backlog as a bottomless to-do list without a clear why connecting the items to a larger vision. Adding the product goal as a formal commitment forces the organization to focus on value delivery rather than just output volume. This ensures that every item added to the backlog serves a strategic purpose, which assists in managing the complex trade-offs inherent in any product development effort. It prevents the drift that occurs when a team loses sight of the end objective while refining individual requirements. By integrating these commitments, Scrum reinforces the idea that transparency is only valuable when coupled with a clear, shared understanding of what success looks like for the product. Staying current with these updates is vital for your certification and your work as a professional Scrum Master. Many legacy resources still teach versions of Scrum from a decade ago, which can lead to confusion during the exam and in practical application. When you approach your preparation, you should prioritize the current Scrum Guide above all other materials. The evolution of the framework represents a continuous improvement loop, mirroring the exact empiricism that Scrum promotes for product delivery. As the framework simplifies, your role as a practitioner becomes more focused on upholding its principles rather than blindly following a set of outdated rules. Understanding the motivation behind these changes allows you to explain the why to your stakeholders, which is a key skill for any effective agent of change within an organization. See you in the next installment. Welcome to the final review of our course, where we consolidate the core Scrum framework to ensure you are fully prepared for your certification. We will examine the essential components of the framework, reinforce the required mindset, and cover the practical steps needed for your final exam readiness. As we reach this final stage, it is useful to reflect on the structural integrity of Scrum, which relies on 3 specific accountabilities, 5 defined events, and 3 core artifacts. The Scrum Master, Product Owner, and developers form a cohesive unit where each role contributes to the delivery of value while maintaining the health of the Scrum process. The 5 events, the Sprint Planning, Daily Scrum, Sprint Review, and Sprint Retrospective, serve as the heartbeats of the framework, providing the necessary cadence for empiricism. Meanwhile, the 3 artifacts, the Product Backlog, the Sprint Backlog, and the Increment, provide the transparent state of our work and the progress we make toward our committed goals. These elements create a system of checks and balances that, when applied correctly, allow teams to navigate complexity with high degrees of predictability. Mastery involves not just knowing these terms, but understanding how they interact to support the underlying theory of empirical process control. Beyond the mechanics, Scrum remains fundamentally rooted in the 3 pillars of empiricism: transparency, inspection, and adaptation. Transparency ensures that all aspects of the process and the product are visible to those responsible for the outcome, which is the prerequisite for effective decision-making. Inspection is the deliberate act of checking on the progress toward the sprint goal and the product goal, allowing for the timely detection of undesirable variances. Adaptation occurs when those inspections reveal that one or more aspects of the process deviate outside acceptable limits, and the process must be adjusted. These pillars only flourish within an environment characterized by the 5 Scrum values: commitment, focus, openness, respect, and courage. Without these values, the framework often degrades into a mechanical checklist that lacks the human element required for true high performance. A successful professional Scrum practitioner understands that passing the exam is merely the entry point to a much deeper journey of organizational transformation. You must shift your mindset from being a project manager who tracks tasks to becoming a servant leader who cultivates the environment for team success. This shift demands that you let go of command and control habits and instead focus on removing impediments that prevent the team from achieving their goals. As you look toward your career, view this certification as a tool to facilitate change rather than an end state in itself. Your goal is to foster a culture of continuous improvement where the organization learns to inspect and adapt at scale. Commitment to this growth will serve you better than any specific technique or tool you might use within a single team. Before you sit for the exam, ensure you have addressed the logistical requirements to minimize stress during the testing window. Verify that your environment meets the technical specifications for the proctoring software, including a stable internet connection and a clear workspace. Check your documentation requirements well in advance to avoid any last-minute administrative issues that could delay your progress. Review your preparation strategy by focusing on the nuances of the Scrum Guide, as the exam is strictly aligned with these definitions rather than external organizational habits. If you have been consistently scoring well on your practice materials, trust in your preparation and maintain your focus during the testing session. Remember that the exam tests your understanding of the principles, so look for the answers that best embody the spirit of self-managing teams and iterative delivery. The global Agile community is built upon a shared commitment to empirical evidence and the relentless pursuit of better ways of working. By choosing to pursue this certification, you're aligning yourself with a community that values continuous learning and professional growth over rigid bureaucratic structures. Leverage your credential as a door opener that allows you to influence leadership and advocate for the teams you support. As you engage with the broader community, keep sharing your experiences and listening to the challenges faced by peers in other industries. Your role as a Scrum Master is not confined by the walls of your company, and the skills you have developed are applicable across any domain where complexity exists. Continue to question, continue to experiment, and continue to guide your teams toward delivering meaningful value and impact. Congratulations on completing this comprehensive program and investing the time required to master the fundamentals of Scrum. See you in your professional career.